Tom Hunt to move the motion. Mr Hunt.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petitions 564, 696, 548, 778, 573, 61 and 564, 209. First one is to do with cancelling GCSE and A-levels in 2021 to replace with coursework and teacher assessment. That's created in 29th December. Second one is to allow teacher predicted grades for BTEC students. Third one is to keep schools closed until May. And then the fourth one is to close schools in all Tier 4 areas. So 4 petitions in total, and clearly over the last 4 or 5 months the situation has been incredibly fluid. So clearly some of these petitions, 2 in particular, circumstances and events have moved ahead of them slightly. However, I do think this is a very valuable opportunity to have a discussion about the impact of COVID-19 on our children's education in a more general sense. I mean, you couldn't get much of a broader debate, and I imagine myself and colleagues will find it very difficult to keep our points concise, because this is such a multifaceted issue, and our children have been impacted in so many different ways by COVID-19, but I will attempt to do so. And I'm just going to cover upon 4 or 5 key lessons that I think we need to take away from this, and some thoughts that I have. And the first one is to do with the danger of making generalisations and also making assumptions about how a child may or may not have found schools being closed, particularly based on, say, the socio-economic background they may come from. There is some evidence produced by Sutton Trust that would suggest that children from more deprived backgrounds have been particularly badly impacted by the closure of schools compared with children from other areas, but we should not necessarily assume that. And we should not assume that because a child, say, was in a different situation, that they found it any easier. Because I've spoken to a number of families whose children have come from a variety of different backgrounds, and for whatever reason have found it particularly difficult, and their mental health has been particularly impacted. And in coming to those sort of generalisations, we should not lose those individual stories, because in some senses, no one child's experience of the past year has been the same. And we need a response that, as far as possible, does cater for that individual child wherever possible. So that's the first point I wanted to make. Secondly, is just in regards to mental health. We had some research published by Mind that said that 73% of those at school had felt as though their mental health had deteriorated over the past year. There is a massive challenge in front of the government. There's a massive challenge in front of schools. There's a massive challenge in front of young people to try and to make up for some of the learning loss that's clearly been and happened over the last year. But another point that I would make is I think we should be careful in the language that we use. There is a big challenge in front of us, but I think we should be aware that the anxiety that many young people feel at the moment is already very significant. So sometimes the words that I see in the media, like lost generation and all of this, I mean, sometimes it can just fuel those anxieties to an even greater extent. So yes, there is a significant challenge in front of us, but we can overcome it. So I think in a sense a degree of positivity and a can-do spirit, because my concern is a daunting situation may become even more daunting if we're not careful in the language that we use. The Minister will be aware from my position on the Education Select Committee that I do speak very frequently about special educational needs. And one of the things, there is, most of the meetings we have, the National SEND review, it has been delayed. But I think if there can be an advantage from this delay, it is that it allows us to properly look at the way in which this pandemic has had a unique or a different impact on different children, and that includes those with special educational needs. And it must include, yes, those with EHCP plans, but it must include those who might not have one of those plans, but still have learning disabilities. And dyslexic and dyspraxic pupils would be the sort of the 2 examples of that, because they haven't been eligible to come into school most recently, for example. They haven't been able to come into school, and some of those individuals have struggled with online learning, and because of the unique way in which many of them learn, not having that personal engagement has often made it much more difficult for them to learn, and some, I fear, have fallen behind more as a result of that. When we talk about those with perhaps more complex and significant needs and disabilities, something else that we need to bear in mind is their mental state and often how they struggle with transitions. So the movement from working online to back into school to online and then back into school can have a profound impact on their mental state. Many of them have been eligible to still keep on coming into school, but many haven't. And there's often been good reasons for that. So I think that kind of therapeutic approach to help them with a transition from what might seem like quite an unsettling period for them is also very important. I am encouraged by what I've heard about the tutoring programme and how when we think about the ways in which our young people can catch up from any learning loss, that there have been some SEN specialists have been feeding into that. That was encouraging, but I think that it would be brilliant if today I could hear more about how that's working in practice. I mean, the next point is to do with exams, and one of the petitions here called for a cancellation of exams. I think bearing in mind the circumstances, I don't think there is any alternative. I think it was the right decision to cancel those exams, but I also believe that it was a regrettable decision. I think it was a decision, I think we were left with no choice, but that doesn't mean that I think it comes with its own negatives. I do believe that exams should be here to stay. I don't think that this should be used as an opportunity to question the role of exams in the medium to long term. I believe that they continue to be the fairest way often of assessing pupils. And I think we should also think about those young people who actually quite like exams, and exams they work for them. And often a lot of those children actually tend to have learning disabilities. And I talk as somebody who who has dyspraxia and has dyslexia. And when I was a 12-year-old, I had a reading writing age of an 8-year-old, ended up catching up and did have my struggles throughout school. But I actually used to quite like exams because I was an unconventional learner. I didn't do well in the classroom. I didn't go at the same pace as everybody else. That revision gave me time to consolidate my knowledge and surprise my exams. And I really would not wanted to have been at school over the last year. So I think we should think about how those children that could feel as though their chance to flourish has been taken away. In terms of the teacher assessments we're going to have this year, there will be some schools that have not these tests, which will feed into the overall assessment. But these tests are not mandatory. Perhaps I think they should have been mandatory. And I'd also say that having spoken to the Minister about this before, my understanding is that the teachers at a school will have a degree of flexibility over this, and my understanding is that not necessarily all of the children, the approach will have to be exactly the same. So it might be that some children in the school can take a test and others don't. I'd also like to think that those pupils could feed into the process, and if they felt that they would, by having a test, that would mean that their teachers are in a better place to make an accurate assessment about their progress, then I think their views should be taken into account. And I go back to the point I made about dyslexic pupils, and I've spoken to two head teachers at dyslexic schools where all of the pupils are dyslexic, and it is interesting that both of those schools have taken a decision to have tests for all pupils. And I think that's useful in providing a sense as to how it may be in all of those children who could be negatively impacted by this. Another point I would like to make is children who have English as a second language. I know that in my own constituency there are many pupils who come under that bracket, and I have spoken to head teachers in my own constituency who are concerned that the level of participation in some of the online learning has been less in those communities, and also that their English has actually gone backwards throughout the time that schools have been closed. So I think when we're thinking about catch-up, that aspect needs to be there also. And I was encouraged from a meeting that the Education Select Committee had recently with the catch-up commissioner. because I've had a number of conversations with head teachers in my constituency recently who said that when we're thinking about catch-up, there needs to be flexibility at the heart of it. And actually, teachers and head teachers who know their children better than anybody else, they should be able to take the decisions that they believe to be in the best interest of each individual child. And that was something that the Catch-up Commissioner made very clear, that will be the case. Because there's lots of things we're going to have to work out, particularly with sort of catch-up schools over the summer, how they're going to interrelate with the holiday food and activity programmes. How are they going to relate to each other? And how's that going to work? So I think having that, that flexibility with catch-up, so the teacher and the head teacher can make those decisions, because it goes back to what I said earlier. We shouldn't make assumptions about how each child has found lockdown, because this idea that and there is an element of truth that clearly if your home environment, some home environments are more conducive to online learning than other environments. There's a reality there. If you don't have your own bedroom, you don't have a quiet place you can work, you might have parents who want to help but frankly can't help you as much as they'd like to with your learning. Or you might live in a different background where you do have your own space, you do have parents who are able to help you. But we shouldn't assume that, because sometimes we might have parents who might be able to help but can't because they're working around the clock. We don't know what their circumstances are going to be. So I think in a nutshell, in summary, I think my key points what I'd like to make are we shouldn't generalise, we shouldn't make assumptions. As far as possible, we should approach each individual young person and try and cater for their own needs. And secondly, unsurprisingly, special educational needs and the different ways in which it's impacted them. Because as I said before, it is so important we get SEND right. It's right morally, it's right for them, but it's also necessary for our country because we don't want to lose their talents. Yeah. And this pandemic in some ways has made a situation harder for them. And we should also think about those children who perhaps this way we've been assessing has worked against them and they've been a loser in that. So I think when we're thinking about how COVID has impacted our young people, we need to be sensitive in the language we use also and conscious of the way in which it's been their learning, but also their mental health that has suffered. It is going to be difficult. It is going to be difficult to catch up. But there are children, and we will do whatever we take to support them. So there needs to be a degree of positivity there as well. Thank you very much.